Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Jawad Tehami and these are the headlines. In Pakistan, authorities have announced that the elderly will start receiving their COVID-19 vaccinations in March. Currently, the frontline health workers are being vaccinated. Meanwhile, a WHO panel has recommended the AstraZeneca vaccine for adults over 18 years old. Globally, there are more than 2.3 million deaths and over 107 million infections. Twitter has refused to block accounts over comments on the ongoing farmers' protest, but imposed restrictions on some of them in India. In a blog post, the social media giant says the Indian government demand was inconsistent with law. The ruling BJP has criticized Twitter for not complying with the demand. In Afghanistan, at least 2 people, including a local police chief, have been killed after multiple bomb blasts rocked Kabul. The latest violence in Kabul follows a pattern of attacks during morning rush hours targeting officials, journalists, activists and judges. In Myanmar, protesters have returned to the streets of capital Naypyidaw after clashes during the anti-coup demonstrations on Tuesday. Hundreds of government workers marched in support of a civil disobedience campaign that has also been joined by doctors. The United States and the United Nations have condemned the use of force against the demonstrators. And in cricket, the first T20 match between South Africa and Pakistan begins in Lahore on Thursday. Pakistan have already won the Test series 2-0 and are upbeat at winning the 3-match series as well. Those were the headlines and detailed stories. Right after a short break, stay tuned. Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. In Pakistan, authorities have announced that the elderly will start receiving their COVID-19 vaccinations in March. The registration for the process will begin next week. Currently, the frontline health workers are being given Sinopharm shots. Pakistan started its nationwide vaccination drive in February after receiving the first batch of 500,000 doses of the Chinese vaccine last month. The country will receive 17 million doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine by June, with the first delivery of 6 million doses scheduled for March. Pakistan has approved 3 coronavirus vaccines: the AstraZeneca vaccine, Chinese state-owned Sinopharm, and Russian-developed Sputnik V. The country has so far recorded 12,128 coronavirus deaths and over 557,000 infections. A panel of World Health Organization experts has recommended the AstraZeneca vaccine for adults over 18 years old. Globally, the virus has claimed more than 2.3 million lives and has infected nearly 107 million people. More in this report.
While vaccines have started providing much-needed hope for the world, experts believe that it is going to take years to figure out how COVID-19 emerged. Even as Canada gradually eases curbs, it has further restricted non-essential travel in and out of the country. Over in South America, the vaccination drives have kicked off in a number of states. Vaccine rollouts have also started on Chile's remote South Pacific Easter Island, famous for its distinctive ancient stones. Peru launched its inoculation campaign with China's Sinopharm, while Venezuela is also scheduled to receive the Russian Sputnik V next week.
The vaccination we have started today is only a first step in the long road that we are traveling. Not only us, all nations around the world, to defeat this insidious and invisible enemy that is the pandemic caused by COVID-19. I hope it is only months. We are betting as much as possible that all Peruvians can be vaccinated in the year of the bicentennial of independence.
The United Kingdom scientific advisors have designated a new version of the Kent variant with a mutation found in the South African variant as a variant of concern. COVID-19 accounted for the highest proportion of deaths in England and Wales of any week so far during the pandemic. Meanwhile, Greece is also set to impose a total ban on public movement in the Attica region till February 28.
Today, the danger is reappearing, not only in the form of thousands of sick and deaths, but with two facts that greatly worry us. On the one hand, the increase of hospitalizations where the health facilities are gradually filling up, and on the other hand, the mutations of the virus that seem to accelerate its transmissibility. We could wait a few more days, but the alarm bells are ringing, and we have learned to act in order to prevent the problem, and not follow behind the problem in order to save lives.
Elsewhere, the French Parliament has approved an extension of the state of health emergency in the country until 1st of June. Spain's coronavirus cases have crossed 3 million, making Madrid only the 7th nation to hit this grim milestone. Hungary is set to become the first European Union country to use the Russian Sputnik V vaccine this week.
More stories to follow right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. The rescue operation to locate 3 climbers who went missing on K2 remained suspended due to harsh weather. No search flight was conducted on Tuesday due to the extreme weather. Pakistan's Mohammad Ali Satpara, John Snorri from Iceland and Juan Pablo Moore from Chile went missing on Friday after summiting the world's 2nd tallest peak. Meanwhile, all foreign climbers at the K2 base camp have decided to end the winter expeditions considering the harsh weather conditions. The president of Alpine Club of Pakistan, Abu Zafar Sadiq, is with us for more on this. Abu Zafar Sadiq, thank you very much for your time at Indus News. So first of all, please share with our viewers what are the updates regarding this search and rescue operation that couldn't be carried out for the last couple of days due to harsh weather conditions.
Thank you very much. In fact, last couple of days, they really searched in the mountains. The heli went to the base camp. They picked up the experts and the people who have been climbing K2. And recently, one of them has climbed K2 in winter as well from Nepal. But unfortunately, the search could not find any clue of the missing climbers. And then today, it was a big rescue mission with the C-130 and heli equipped with highly sophisticated cameras and experts could not be undertaken due to weather. So we are very unfortunate that the Pakistan Army and the government is taking it very seriously and trying to locate these missing climbers. Unfortunately, due to bad weather, it could not be, undertake this rescue or search of today's operation.
Mr. Sadiq, all eyes are set on this particular search and rescue operation, which might be carried out when the conditions happen to be better in coming days. So previously we have seen Ali Satpara saying that he can survive in harsh weather conditions for a couple of days. So can Pakistanis, actually people from across the world, hope for a miracle to happen?
Yes, miracle can be happened any time, and people like this always loved by the nation. Mostly, they want to listen to this miracle, but the reality is quite harsh, or I'd say bitter. That the height his son is telling us about above 8,000 meters he was going, and after that there was no clue, and there are very, very remote chances of survival, as experts say that above 8,000 meters, if there is accident, then no chance, and then if there is something, weakness or like that, they could not move from one place to other. In that harsh and extreme cold, it is very difficult to survive more than 10 hours. without any movement. So a miracle we can expect because whole of the nation is looking for the missing climber's clue. But harsh reality or the bitter realities are quite contradicting, we are seeing.
Abu Zafar Sadiq, thank you very much for your time. Indus News, President Alpine Club of Pakistan, we really appreciate that. Now moving on, in Pakistan, the Supreme Court has barred death penalty for inmates with mental health issues. The court announced the verdict after reserving its judgment on the point whether mentally ill death row prisoners can be executed. The top court said death penalty for mentally ill does not meet the ends of justice. But it clarified that not every mental illness shall automatically qualify for an exemption from carrying out the death sentence. The court also directed using terms like mental disorder or mental illness to refer to cognitive ailments. And for more on this, we are joined by legal expert, Barrister Sara Bilal. Sara, thank you for your time at Indus News. So what impact do you think this verdict would have on the criminal justice system in Pakistan?
So I think this is a landmark judgment by the Pakistan Supreme Court. And the first and most important thing it does is that it just really reiterates and reaffirms the protections that are present in our law for some of the most vulnerable people, which are people suffering with psychosocial disabilities, mental illnesses, mental disorders, and it reaffirms their protected status within our criminal justice system. So that's one of the most important things, is the most extensive look that the Pakistani Supreme Court has given in its history about the treatment of people suffering with people with psychosocial disabilities and their treatment through the legal system. Secondly, it has also clarified standards for how various actors within the criminal justice system are to deal with such people, to ensure that their due process rights are upheld, that they're able to participate in the legal process, and in cases in which they are not able to fully participate in the legal process, to not treat them as being fully competent to take part in the legal process, and therefore, subjecting them to a procedure that they might not be able to take part in, and unduly punishing them harshly or sentencing them wrongly. So that's the second thing that it does. And the third most important thing that it does is that it has finally, in line with the international treaties that Pakistan has signed, which are the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, the ICCPR, the Convention Against Torture, it has upheld the obligations contained in those conventions that Pakistan has signed and ratified, which require that people who suffer from severe mental illness or psychosocial disabilities at the time of execution become incompetent or ineligible to be executed.
Okay, Sara, in the verdict, the court has stated not all mental illnesses shall automatically qualify for an exemption. So how do you explain this?
So I want to clarify the court's position on this from our reading of the judgment. The court has relied on some seminal cases from the US Supreme Court as well as the Indian Supreme Court. In all of those cases, the jurisprudence as it's evolved, started from a time when they were looking at the same question. Is there any penal purpose served by executing a person who does not understand the reason for their execution or the nature of it or why they're being executed? Now, that was the very beginning in Ford and Panetti, which are these seminal US cases in which this question was first brought before the US Supreme Court. And the court there decided that it violated the human dignity, and it amounted to cruel and inhuman punishment for somebody who was mentally ill or to be executed. Now, our court relies on that precedence, and it also looks at Indian Supreme Court precedents, and it reaches a similar conclusion, but with a more expansive understanding of what constitutes mental illness. So the court does place a bar in our judgment. It does place a bar on the execution of mentally ill prisoners. It does, however, say that not every kind of mental disorder or illness qualifies to be exempt from to exempt you from execution. However, the question of who gets exempted or who gets executed is going to be tried by a special medical board formed specifically for that purpose. And the court also lays down in its recommendations towards the end of the judgment specific training and protocols that must be followed and laid out for mental health professionals, for such board members that will be a part of this board. It gives specific instructions to provincial authorities to constitute boards for that purpose. These are not the general medical boards that look at, regular mental health evaluations. These are solely for the purpose of understanding who is eligible for execution or not. So I think our court, and again, in other parts of the judgment, the court does discuss, what kind of mental illnesses and mental disorders are recognized. And, remarkably, this is something to be applauded. It looks at international standards such as the ICD-10, which is going to be the ICD-11, DSM-5. And it also quotes saying that these are evolving medical standards. So it's a very progressive judgment that actually leaves that part open to evolving medical science and standards. So I would say that the court has really taken a very key first step, keeping in mind what other Supreme Courts and other jurisdictions, common law jurisdictions, have the journey that they've taken. And I think they've taken a very progressive path by not restricting and laying down a strict test, but actually looking to lay down some basic foundations and leaving the door open for medical science to inform this position as it goes ahead.
Barrister Sara Bilal, thank you very much for talking to Indus News. We really appreciate that. Now, moving on, another British lawmaker has slammed Indian oppression in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Richard Bergen said New Delhi is violating human rights by denying Kashmiris their right to self-determination. In a video message, Bergen said London has a special duty to help the people of Kashmir and to end their suffering. He also reminded the UN of its unfulfilled promise of the right of self-determination for them. Bergen said India put Kashmiris under lockdown way before coronavirus and committed gross atrocities. He said that it is unfortunate that Kashmiris have to wait decade after decade for justice. Twitter has refused to block accounts over comments on the ongoing farmers' protest, but imposed restrictions on some of them in India. In a blog post, the social media giant says the Indian government demand was inconsistent with law. The ruling BJP has criticized Twitter for not complying with the demand. The US-based company has found itself in a heated dispute with Narendra Modi's administration. Last week, Indian government sent Twitter a notice of non-compliance that threatens its executives with jail terms of up to 7 years. New Delhi also asked Twitter to restrict access to some news accounts, but Twitter did not budge, citing its policy of defending freedom of speech. In Afghanistan, at least 2 people, including a local police chief, have been killed after multiple bomb blasts rocked Kabul. The latest violence in Kabul follows the pattern of attacks during morning rush hours targeting Afghan officials, journalists, activists and judges. Meanwhile, the government claimed to have killed 22 Taliban during an operation in eastern Ghazni province. However, the Taliban say the attack was repulsed and only 3 fighters were killed. The Saudi-led coalition says Houthi rebels launched an attack on the Aba airport in Saudi Arabia that caused a fire in a civilian aircraft. The state media said the fire has been brought under control. The coalition also said it intercepted and destroyed 2 Houthi drones targeting civilian areas in Saudi Arabia. The number of drones downed in the last week has now risen to 7. The Houthi attacks come only days after the US ended its support for the military offensive in Yemen. In Myanmar, protesters have returned to the streets of capital Naypyidaw after clashes in the anti-coup demonstrations yesterday. Thousands of people also joined demonstrations in the main city of Yangon. In Naypyidaw, hundreds of civil servants and doctors marched in support of a growing civil disobedience campaign. There have been reports of serious injuries as police used water cannons against the protesters on Tuesday. The West has voiced strong concern over the violence and rejected the use of force against the protesters. Aung San Suu Kyi is under house arrest, while many other NLD officials have also been detained since the February 1 military coup. Suu Kyi's party, NLD, says Myanmar's military also raided and destroyed the party's headquarters. In Thailand, hundreds of demonstrators took to the streets in Bangkok to protest against the country's strict royal insult law. They are also calling for the release of 4 activists detained on Tuesday on charges of insulting Thailand's king. The Bangkok demonstration had originally been organized to show solidarity with the protesters in Myanmar, but it quickly morphed into calls to change or end the strict royal insult law. This comes a day after some 44 opposition lawmakers submitted a proposal to amend the article. Anti-government protests erupted last year after a court banned an opposition party critical of the ruling elite. Palestinian factions Fatah and Hamas have agreed on the mechanisms for upcoming legislative and presidential elections. In a joint statement, 12 Palestinian factions pledged to abide by the timetable for the long-delayed balloting and accept the results. The factions also agreed to establish an elections court based on judges from Jerusalem, the West Bank and Gaza. It's that no one other than the Palestinian police will guard the voting sites in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. The two sides also agreed to release detainees held on political grounds and allow unrestricted campaigning. The reconciliation was reached at the end of the 2-day session of intra-Palestinian talks in Egypt's capital, Cairo. The European Union has called on Israel to stop demolishing Palestinian homes. In a statement, a foreign policy spokesperson said Tel Aviv should facilitate aid access to Palestinian communities instead. They said the bloc considers Israel's actions illegal and an impediment to a viable two-state solution. The spokesperson said Brussels firmly opposes Israel's settlement policies such as forced transfers, evictions, demolitions and confiscations of homes. They said some 60 Palestinians, including 35 children, have been displaced after 46 homes were demolished recently in the Jordan Valley. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says a two-state solution is the only way to resolve decades of dispute over Cyprus. Addressing the parliament, he said a federation favored by Greece will not be on the agenda of upcoming talks. Erdogan said recent statements by Athens and Nicosia showed they were disregarding Turkish Cypriot authorities. He was referring to the remarks by the leaders of Greece and Cyprus in which they rejected the two-state formula supported by Turkey. This comes ahead of the UN-backed talks involving Cyprus's 2 communities as well as the 3 guarantor nations, Greece, Turkey and the UK. Turkey has signaled a willingness to compromise with the US over the Russian S-400 ballistic missile defense system. In an interview, Turkey's defense minister Hulusi Akar said Ankara may refrain from full deployment of the Russian system. Akar said the defense systems will only be operational in the time of crisis on the basis of Turkey's threat perception. The defense minister also expressed the intent to negotiate with the US to resolve the issue. However, he said that without solving the issue of US backing for PKK in Syria, the S-400 issue can't be settled as well. Ankara's purchase of the Russian missile defense battery has put extra strain on the US-Turkey relations. After a day of intense negotiations, the UN Security Council has failed to agree on a joint declaration on war-torn Syria. The declaration was meant to jumpstart the stalled peace process for Syria after nearly 10 years of bloody conflict. Diplomats say the failure to agree on a declaration was due to Russia, as it made demands unacceptable to Western nations. Speaking to the media, UN Special Envoy Geir Pedersen called for bridging the divisions in the international community. Well, 5 current and the former EU members of the Security Council blamed the Syrian government for obstructing the process. The US Senate has voted to move forward with former President Donald Trump's impeachment trial. Former President Trump faces a charge of incitement of insurrection over the deadly January 6 Capitol Hill riots.
The 100-member chamber voted 56 to 44, largely along the party lines, declaring the trial constitutional. As the proceeding began, House impeachment managers presented a video interspersing images of the Capitol violence with clips of Trump's incendiary speech. Meanwhile, Trump's lawyers termed the proceeding as unconstitutional and partisan effort to close off Trump's political future. Only 6 Republicans, including Senator Bill Cassidy, joined the Democrats in voting to go ahead with the trial. Democrats hope to disqualify Trump from ever again holding public office, but Tuesday's outcome suggested they faced long odds.
I said I'd be an impartial juror. Anyone listening to those arguments, the House managers were focused, they were organized, they relied upon both precedent, the Constitution, and legal scholars. They made a compelling argument. President Trump's team were disorganized. They did everything they could but to talk about the question at hand. And when they talked about it, they kind of glided over it, almost as if they were embarrassed of their arguments.
Trump's conviction seems unlikely as the Democrats are well short of 2/3 majority. It is required to indicate the former president in the evenly split 100-seat Senate.
The U.S. says it plans to continue to seek extradition of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange from the UK to face hacking conspiracy charges. Assange is facing 17 espionage charges, which carry a maximum sentence of 175 years in prison. Talking to reporters, Justice Department spokesperson Mark Raimondi said Washington will challenge a British judge's ruling that turned down Assange's extradition. In a January 4 ruling, the judge said it would be oppressive to extradite Assange to the U.S. based on his mental condition. The judge set Friday as a deadline for the U.S. to appeal her ruling forbidding Assange's extradition. Meanwhile, Assange supporters have been pressing the Biden administration to drop charges against him. In the U.S. state of Minnesota, 1 person has been killed and 4 others wounded in a shooting at a health clinic northwest of Minneapolis. Officials say 3 of the injured are in critical condition. Police say a 67-year-old male suspect has been taken into custody. Investigators believe the suspect acted alone and singled out the clinic over a personal grudge against the facility or its staff. Bomb technicians are investigating several suspicious devices left at the crime scene and at a motel where the suspect was staying. In central Mali, 20 United Nations peacekeepers were injured when their base camp under fire by unknown assailants. The UN mission in Mali didn't say who was responsible. However, militants linked to ISIS and Al-Qaeda are believed to carry out such attacks. Deployed since 2013, the UN currently has over 14,000 peacekeepers in the country. The UAE's first mission to Mars has entered the red planet's orbit after a 7-month journey of 494 million kilometers. The mission's project manager, Omran Sharaf, announced the success of the probe. In a tweet, Mohammed bin Rashid Space Center said the HOPE probe will provide the first holistic picture of the Martian atmosphere. UAE's space agency has now become only the 5th to reach Mars. More stories to follow, but right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Nathan Xanga, a young Afro-American artist from Seattle, is pushing for justice through his music and protests. The US-born son of immigrants from Congo has been featured in a movie that adds his artistic perspective to the social justice movement. This report has more.
Xanga has written songs that reflect why he protests. Compositions calling for change and telling his story as an Afro-American. Featuring his music, a short film starring Xanga was released online last month. The 13-minute film starring Xanga is titled Enough and opens with the song Truce.
Damn, when did we get like this? Seems like every day we add a few more names to the list. The innocent don't stay alive, the children are desensitized, and to be honest, I'm scared I'm the next one that they'll hit.
It's pretty much a documentary of me growing up, figuring out who I'm supposed to be or who I want to be, even with the challenges of that the world's been throwing at me. And I don't know, you get to see me grow up from 11 to now, and you get to hear my thoughts from where I was at when I wrote Truce and where I'm at now.
Xanga says he followed the news between camp activities and learned about the deaths of several fellow Afro-Americans. In his song Truce, the Seattle-based musician says, daily there is a new name on the list and he fears that he will be the next victim.
Can't love me if you don't know me. Can't know me if you don't hear me.
I wrote Truce to try to make a difference, and I wrote enough to say that, like, what else is there for me to do? Like, I feel tired. Like, how much love do I have to give to receive any love back?
The film also includes another song, which he wrote following the death of George Floyd, who was killed by a white police officer last year. Xanga hopes people watch the film and acknowledge how he gave his best to spread a message of love.
Sunny day, ain't sitting out riding, I'm going out fighting. I got a whole lot of empathy.
And now the business updates. The U.S. stocks have opened at a record highs as investors cheered solid corporate earnings as well as data showing a subdued inflation. Wall Street's main indices are in the green. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is trading higher by about 0.25%, while the S&P 500 and the Nasdaq Composite have gained about 0.5%. Meanwhile, oil extended its rally for a 9th day, supported by supply cuts by OPEC+. And now the weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News.